Good evening, everybody. Thank
Good
you
evening.
for joining our meeting tonight. This is the very first meetup we're having in 2024, and I'm happy to welcome you all to our session. This year, we will be focusing on AI, artificial intelligence. We deliberately didn't do too much on AI last year because I didn't just want to jump on the buzz wagon, as it were, to talk about AI because everybody was talking about it. I wanted to make sure that we were very, very deliberate about what we had to do. And of course, we tried to ensure that we concluded the various areas of data analytics that we were trying to conclude on. So, but this year, we will be talking about AI and AI in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And we are starting with privacy. I believe that we're going to have a lot of excitement this year. I also believe that we are going to do a lot of learning this year. And more importantly, I know that this year we are going to be more visible. The team is working hard to be more visible on social media, to be more visible in terms of our offerings, to be more visible in terms of our deliveries to you, and to be more visible in terms of partnerships with those we work with. So as said before, we are a community. We are not a front door to some backdoor business whereby we want to make money off. The goal and the drive is to bring together people who do data and to see how we can support each other and grow together. And yes, we believe that with your support and your consistent attendance, we'll be able to achieve this together. So thank you everyone for joining. Also to Amaka, who is our guest tonight. Thank you so much. She's one very consistent supporter. She would always attend. She would always, she would always come on board to visit our meetings and everything. Despite that, she's about 9 hours behind Nigeria's time zone. I think it's now 8 hours. I'm not sure, but she would always wake up. So now you people have closed your from your offices, on your way home. She's just starting her day, and she has made that huge sacrifice to be with us. So even though she looks like us, she's not where we are. So she's really making a huge sacrifice to join us today. And more than that, she's also doing a lot. She's also done a lot for us in the past to always attend our meetings. And we do not take it for granted. Thank you so much, Amaka. And thank you everyone who has joined. I see Rochelle Strada, I see Esther, I see Kelechi, I see Stephen, I see Kazim, I see Victoria, and other members of the team who have taken time out of their busy schedule. Thank you very much. We need you to make us happy, because it is when you come that we are happy. It is when you come that we're encouraged. And it is when you come that we're able to create programs for you. So we look forward to an exciting session with Amaka tonight. And yes, we have an Ask Me Anything session afterwards, and I'll be back at that time. Okay, over to you, Ayo, and over to Amaka. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Mr. Tosin. So we'll go right into it. Amaka Ibeji, she's such, as Mr. Tosin had said earlier, she's such a strong support. And I had the opportunity to, kind of like dig a little bit into her profile, and I was wowed. She has, please correct me if I'm wrong, over 17 years of experience in the tech industry. I think she started out as a software analyst with Jury Computers. She moved on to Digital Encode as an information security officer. She also worked as an information security consultant at Info Ashura X. She was also a senior consultant for security and privacy at Deloitte Consulting. She joined UBA Group, where I previously worked as well as lead IT enterprise security. She moved on to Packer as the global information security analyst. And then she moved on to Microsoft. First of all, started out as a privacy compliance SME and product strategist before she became a product strategist. She currently works with Cruise as privacy engineer. She has an MSc in information technology management and organizational change. Also, she has quite a lot of certifications. ISO 27701 lead auditor. She's a certified information systems auditor. She also has ISO 27002 lead implementer. She's a certified information system security professional. She's also a certified information security manager. You know, she comes with a whole lot of experience, and I'm very sure she's here tonight or this evening to, give us insights into demystifying AI data privacy. I know for a fact that a lot of organizations right now are taking data privacy very seriously. And I'm very sure that a lot of companies are being fined currently for those who, violate the data privacy code and all of that. I also know for a fact in the company that I work currently that but they're always shouting about data privacy. You need to keep your data secured. Everybody is, so big on data privacy nowadays. Companies are hiring a lot of people in the data privacy space and all of that. So tonight, please join me as we welcome Amaka Ibeji to take us through the session, Demystifying AI Data Privacy. Thank you, Amaka. Please, we can give her a virtual round of applause as she is welcome to take up the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayatunde. I guess this may be the first time I'd heard, my career journey being read in such a way, but I appreciate it. I appreciate being here. And so I will be diving right into the conversation. I mean, we know that AI is big in the market. The hype around AI is really out there. And today, what we're going to be looking at, when I looked at demystifying AI, there's so many ways to really talk about AI, but I want to focus today on the AI life cycle. And because we are in such an amazing gathering of data professionals like you, it makes sense for me to come at an angle to begin to open the discourse around going through the AI life cycle. What are those implications for privacy? And the reason why I would think this is important is because AI is based on data. That's what's makes it different from traditional applications. If you want to build an AI model, you need data. It sits and feeds off of data to be able to identify patterns and make predictions and the likes. And so when we talk about that data and the utility of AI, we see that we're getting into the world of so much personalization, and most of these data we're referring to is, personal data about where you go, what you do, who you are. All of this data is what is being churned into a model. And the conversation today is one look at the life cycle. But first of all, let's start with what really is data privacy, and then we could double click into the different AI lifecycle and talk about what should you be thinking about in each of those. And if peradventure we have a privacy engineer or a data privacy specialist here, we could also be looking at it from the lens of what questions should I be asking when I'm pulled into the room for an AI project. When you're pulled in early, what sort of questions, how should you be engaging? So that's going to be the heart of my conversation. I'm deliberately leaving it high level so that we could lend simplicity to the topic and bring in more voices and questions that you may have, and then we could unpack as we go ahead. So that being said, let's look at data privacy overview. When we really talk about data privacy, and this is one of the things we have to understand, that there's a distinction between data security and data privacy. When we look at data privacy, we're looking at data handling. Data has been collected from individuals. The question is, who is collecting this data and what are they doing with the data, from the collection, from the use, the storage of the information, the processing of the information, up to even deletion of the information. And because we know that AI feeds off of data when it comes to personal information, then we want to treat it differently. And the reason is because AI, exacerbates, the risk that comes with gathering of personal information. So it is of essence that data privacy be baked into the pipeline of AI models so that we can avoid misuse. We can build responsibly, because as we go down the line, we can start looking at AI misuse that has occurred. And that is really critical, because this misuse is not hypothetical. We've seen real cases of misuse when one has been denied access to resource just based on an AI model prediction. We've seen issues of people being arrested just because of AI, wrongly identifying someone. So all of these are real life issues, and so we need to treat with care. That being said, let's talk about the life cycle of AI. When we talk about the life cycle of AI, to put it simply, when we look at AI life cycle, it goes from planning. When we talk about what needs to be built, we look at the problem statement. What are we building? That is the planning phase. And then we go into the design phase. Design is, what algorithm are we going to use? Design talks about, okay, where are we getting the data from? Where are we sourcing the data from? We get into the nitty-gritty in the design phase. And then development gets into the hardcore of really building these models. And based off of this, that's where we sort of do the testing to be sure that we're addressing any known privacy risk. And of course, deployment is when we get this out into the world. And, I kind of put an AI lifecycle overview where we look at planning. I talked about, project goals. What do we want to achieve? What is the data requirement? What is the desired outcomes? We need to document this at the planning phase. And so when we get into the design phase, we need to understand, what the architecture is, what the algorithm is that we want to design. And then we get into development, just like I've explained, and then the deployment phase. And each of these phases is a crucial part of the whole pipeline, and there are privacy implications as we go down the pipeline. So let's just jump right into the heart of today's conversation. Planning phase. What are we looking at in planning phase? Planning phase is, for example, you say, hey, we want to build maybe model to do a prediction, for example, build a hiring model that would look at candidates and predict who is likely to be hired. Or there could also be a prediction to say who is likely to leave the organization in the next 6 months. There are predictions like that. We could also have predictions that say, how much can we offer this person that the person is likely to accept? For us to get those predictions, that there's been a crunch of data over time to be able to predict it. And I always say to a large extent, human beings are really predictable when you stay long enough in the space. So one of the things we look at from a privacy standpoint is really data mapping. We want to start having the conversation. I know you want to talk about the business problem. We want to talk about the value proposition that we need to land. We want to talk about, what the key performance indicators will look like. But we also want to ask ourselves, where are we getting this data from? And when we look at the data, we want to understand the history of the data. Where's this data? Who collected this data? Are we the ones who collected the data? Are we sourcing this data externally? What is in this data? Because every data has a story. So we want to be able to unpack these data. We want to really sit with ourselves and ask, do we even have the right to use this data? The next thing I put out here is stakeholder consultation. When we get into the AI governance space and, AI lifecycle, we know that it's not just privacy in the room having the conversation. It's not just the data engineers in the room. We need the business people. We need the legal folks. We need, a cross-functional team. Multiple stakeholders needs to be in the room. And so we need to begin to engage with these stakeholders to, number one, allow them to understand what are the potential privacy risks. Sometimes based on the business case, there are even potential privacy risks. For example, if we're going to be building, developing a model, let's take a model to predict a disease, right? You start asking yourself the question, where are we getting the data set from? Oh, we're getting the data set from the US. Okay, when this goes live, where would it be deployed? Would it be deployed in Africa? Would it be deployed in Asia? What might be the unintended consequence of doing that? What's the difference between that data set being collected from the US and collected from a different part of the world? And personally, I've seen that sometimes error rates go high when the data set is not diverse. So someone like me, I like to push for diverse data set, especially when the outcome of this system would be deployed, in a broader market. So wherever this model will serve, we need to ensure that there are representatives of those data in the data set. So that's really very key, because sometimes it will fail just because of lack of representation. So those are the kind of conversations we have. And of course, we want here to also have the conversation around regulatory landscape. This is where you need to engage with the legal folks, especially because privacy, you have to think about it this way. I'm a privacy engineer, but I always think about privacy legal, where we have the privacy lawyers, and then you have privacy engineering folks. The privacy lawyers are the ones who will understand the nuances of the regulations across different markets, across different jurisdictions, where we are or where we want to serve. So there is a constant conversation. If we have a data set, do we even have the right to use the data set? What do we need to unlock before we can use the data set? So those are the questions we have in the planning phase. Just high level feasibility. Does this make sense? Does this cut through what we're thinking? And one of the outcomes from this phase is really a privacy impact assessment to say, hey, based on the business goal, this is what the impact might be to end users. This is what the impact might be to people based on what we've heard. And of course, this is very key on the use case, and use case may change over time, and that's why documentation is key. And so we move to the design phase. Now we've done the planning, we're now entering into design, where we start thinking about what algorithm we're looking to now start identifying. Typically, this is the data set that we'll be using. This is where we're getting this data. And in all of these phases, you start looking at a lot of contractual agreement, especially if the data will be sourced outside of the organization, if it's not a data set that we have. So we need to ensure that we're unlocking access to these data sets. And once we start getting this data in-house, we want to start looking at data classification. Yes, and in this point, we always say if you don't understand the data, you may not understand the privacy risk. So we want to look at the data. What is in the data? What are we collecting? What are the different attributes in the data? What are the data points? We want to ensure that that is being done because we have to test for sensitivity. So it's not just all about PII is not, we also have to test for sensitive attributes in this scenario during the design phase. And once we have the data, we've looked at it, we've classified it, the next thing we begin to look at is how can we minimize this data? We don't want a situation where we pass. So for example, I was talking of the hiring models. If this company has been hiring for the last 50 years, and for some reason, there's been a lot of Mike in the organizations who have been superstar. Trust me, when someone comes with their resume and this model has been trained, if the name and everything has been put into it and your name is Mike, you're likely to get a bomb. So data minimization is very key here to ensure that, what PII are we taking out of the data set so we can ensure privacy for the different individuals, because once you crunch it into a model, there's a lot of likelihood it could lead to, inferences once the model gets deployed. So data minimization is key. And one way to think about it in this phase is to begin to think about privacy threat model. This is where, one of the outcome here is once we have the data, we have the purpose, because now we have additional piece of information, because as we go from planning to design, it begins to flesh out. So here we start doing threat modeling. We want to understand with this data, can we, is there a likelihood for linkability to an individual? Is there a likelihood for identifiability to even knowing who this individual is? We want to ensure that we are taking care of all those at this phase, because now we have proximity to the data. And of course, one of my interests in this space is privacy enhancing technology. And because I've worked in R&D for a while, is most times we have data analysts that wants to just go data engineer, want to go use live data, want to go use user data. I always say if you have a hypothesis that you want to test, because sometimes they just want to test, is there a pattern that we could uncover in our data? Is there something that we could learn so that we could do something differently? Most times it's intended for good, to be able to serve our customers well, to be able to serve users well. But I always say, if you want to test, can we create a synthetic copy of the data set? And so you train on synthetic data. So you don't have a ton of data scientists playing with your real data, because these people are human beings at the end of the day, right? And we want to be sure that customer data is tightly controlled. So synthetic data is one of the privacy enhancing technology. Another one that I've kind of seen in practice is sometimes we are dealing with highly sensitive piece of information, like I mentioned, and collating this information or centralizing this information from multiple sources might be a challenge or a heightened privacy risk. What if it got breached? So we could begin to think about, let's think about running our model through federated learning, where the data stays in the source and our model learns from the source. So those are some techniques we could start exploring. And the reason I'm mentioning it on this call is, in your organization, if you start getting pushback from leveraging data to design your models, you could start asking, what else can we do? Can we do execute on federated learning, where we don't have to collect the data, because you're getting maybe your privacy teams are telling you, hey, we cannot ingest this data, we cannot collocate this data, we cannot centralize this data because of the risk. You could start talking about, what if the data is where it is and we, use federated learning and layer it on differential privacy. Differential privacy just simply says, there's no way of telling if an individual is in the data set or is removed from the data set. It really introduces noise into the data set. Again, once you're collecting different updates from models from a variety of source, it's we could also introduce differential privacy to ensure that we are also adding some level of noise. So it's a protective measure in itself. So those are privacy enhancing technologies we bring to the table in the design phase, especially when there are constraints, or to really protect the data to ensure that we're minimizing privacy risk. And here it's there's secure multi-party computation. Yes, different data set from different parties who do not want to share the data, but they want to get insight. So you come up with the secure multi-party computation, and the data is in one location, and then you could do your training on the data set without necessarily sharing the data set. I know traditionally to build AI models, people want to see the data, they want to see the schema, they want to even see the data and things like that. But with increased privacy risk, we should start thinking through privacy enhancing technologies. And I could go into the weeds with this, but let's move on to the development phase. Now, this is core. We are set to start building our model. But for example, we start asking ourselves, where's this data set? So I put secure coding practice here because we still need secure coding practices even while developing AI. But on top of that, we need to also protect the sensitive data. We need to protect the data. So I'm making an assumption here that the data set that we're working with has sensitive piece of information. So how do you protect that? That's where secure coding practice, secure environment, we need to ensure that that is in place, because we've seen things like data poisoning. And that's, when you go through the AI lifecycle, you also need the adversarial mindset. I know it's painstakingly hard to build a model, but we have adversaries, and these adversaries are not necessarily the people we're partnering with, is the hackers out there who want to get into your system, into the life cycle and infiltrate it. What if they can infiltrate the data before training happens? That's a plus in their books. So that's why your data set needs to be tightly controlled. And as much as possible, I talked about the privacy enhancing technologies. We need to ensure that is in place. And on top of that, the coding environment has to be secure. So I make mention these things. I talk about what needs to happen because these are known risks. And when you hear about this in practice, you shouldn't see it as a constraint on your work, but you should see the greater good of how all of these controls will help us build in a responsible way, and even in a defensible way, to say, hey, we've done X, Y, Z, we're responsible across our practice. And jumping on that is feature engineering. This is where we begin to call, because when you start going into niche areas, for example, I did a lot of work around health-related AI solutions, not data science that would talk about the features. We need to get the SMEs, the subject matter experts, the doctors, irrespective, the experts in that space to really come interpret, what these features are. And the data privacy engineer needs to be in the room to really understand the features. And by features, I mean really the attributes of the table. So you're getting a data set. What does each column mean, and which of this column, is likely to make an impact on the final outcome. We want to be able to ensure that we understand that. And so if, for example, you have a data set and it's like, oh, we are making features based on race, based on gender, it has to be justifiable so that it doesn't lead to discrimination. And this is something a lot of people don't think about, but just by having this conversation, we want to start thinking about it. What are these features? Will these features lead to discrimination down the line? We want to have those conversations so that we avoid encoding biases into our AI model. So that's very critical, asking the right questions, and not just because there has to be a privacy person in the room, but you, as an individual who wants to build responsibly, depending on your role, just by listening through this call, you might want to challenge some assumptions and ask the right questions, and also have conversations with your privacy engineer, because at the end of the day, it's a collective responsibility. So if you're not asking the questions, you want to open up that conversation. And in the development phase, we also look at model evaluation. We want to, from the planning phase, we talked about what kind of KPIs are we looking to get. So here we're looking at evaluating the model. This is where we start looking at, interpretability of the models. We want to see when there's a prediction, what did the model use in determining that output, that score? Is it based on, so depending on the data set, so you would see a lot of weights. So it might say, oh, I placed a lot of weight on this particular attribute. So that attribute, we want to really understand that attribute. And so in model evaluation, that is where we talk about it. One thing we should also remember, there's something we call proxy identifiers. So for example, maybe I should even give an example with Nigeria, because so maybe you're building a model in Nigeria for maybe health insurance, and over time, there's been a prediction that, oh, people who live on the island, and now this is just being very specific in Lagos, there's the island mainland conversation, or the island mainland divide, and you're doing this analysis, and part of your attribute is saying, where do you live? And so it's able to tell if this person is on the island or on the mainland. And for some reason, it's predicting those who are on the island likely to be able to afford health insurance. Now you could tell, because you have contextual information, that, oh, it seems it is categorizing people on the island as those who have more money. It's making some inference because it's looking at patterns. And sometimes you might be able to question those or suppress the fact that, hey, location should not be a determining factor in this data set. The reason, again, is if this model is supposed to be giving access to health insurance, and for some reason you put your address and then it denies you, you might want to probe, why is it denying? What's the explanation? How can we interpret it? What is this relying on to generate that prediction? And so if you have the interpretability, and then you're saying, hey, one of them is a high weighting of maybe 50-something% just based on location, you might look at this individual and say, hey, the person might be on the mainland for different reasons, but they have other criteria that would make them afford this. So those are things you might want to start challenging and also refine as you go along. So that's something to think about. Don't always think about black box. Always look for how can we make sense of what we're predicting. And so let's go to the next phase. And so this is the phase before we move on in development. This is really core because this is the phase before we're going live, right? Before we're deploying it out there. So we want to be sure that we're really because of course we have our split data we've trained, and now we're testing. We want to be sure that, hey, we're also looking at, is there potential for bias, potential for discrimination and things like that. We want to be testing all of those. We want to be testing on the weightings on our features. So those are the conversations we're having on here. And so next is the deployment phase, addressing AI issues in deployment. In this phase, the privacy engineer, based on additional piece of information that we've gathered over time, will now be building a robust, privacy impact assessment. That's something that should be done, just to say, hey, based on all of our learning. Remember when we first started, we just had the business case, we did the privacy impact assessment. Now, this privacy impact can really be now thinking of it, it could even be in the development phase, yes, before going live. But we also know that there are learnings that come once the model is out in the world. So, and sometimes for release of model, we can have a private release before a public release. It's always good to get this release so that if there's any unexpected behaviors or unexpected patterns, you could really roll back and revisit this case. So I don't necessarily see this as a clear waterfall. We learn, we iterate as we go along. So doing the privacy impact assessment here, just taking into consideration what data, what have we learned, what might be the potential risk to individuals. We want to be sure we're documenting it here. As we expose these, into the real world, this is really key, user consent, because users will begin to use this. We have to notify users that, of course, if you're using an AI tool, you want to know. And the reason you want to know is because for an opportunity for I always say user interaction, user experience is the mantra to my career. When you build for users, you want to also enable users, because I think fundamentally that is one way of respecting people, is how can we encourage redress? So how do we drive AI redress if someone finds a problem with the prediction? What mechanism, how can they report it? How can they let us know without going on X platform or a social media platform? Where is that channel for redress? Now, this is also particularly important because over time, we could see a high accuracy of a model, but because of high accuracy of the model, I talk about human on the loop, a responsible human on the loop. What that means is the more accurate the model is, the more likely people are to relax and say, hey, this is the holy grail. No, if an individual is reporting an action, we need responsible people to take it up and drive the resolution to those challenges, because everyone is different. Context changes over time. In fact, we also have model drift over time, data drift over time. So this is something we should institute, especially when we have AI being deployed out there. So this is part of process and continuous monitoring. Like I said, we have to continue to monitor. We have to continue to test the test that we did during the development phase. This is something we have to do on an iterative basis. So as we kind of start wrapping up before we switch into question and answer, ethical considerations in AI and privacy, algorithmic fairness, because this is not an individual being fair. This is an algorithm driving the show. Typically, when people build models, they like to say these are co-pilot, meaning it is enabling a user to make a decision. So we want to be sure that, the algorithm is fair. Like I mentioned, there's usually an over-reliance on the algorithm and, hands up for the professional. So we want to ensure this is fair. So we're ensuring AI systems are designed to mitigate biases like we talked about and promote fairness, data minimization, just right sizing of the amount of information we need to collect across the life cycle of across the AI life cycle, and then transparency and accountability. This is really key, especially to those making the decision and also to the users that we serve We need to ensure transparency and accountability. And so this is, where I conclude the talk on saying, going forward, what's really the next steps for you and I. This is an evolving space. This is a space that I'm really invested in. And so really it's about reflecting on the privacy initiatives and really identify areas of improvement within your organization, or if you've been called to participate. Are we even participate in AI model? Do we have this finely defined life cycle management? Are we talking about privacy? What sort of data are we using? Reflect on what has been your experience so far, or if this is something you may be working on in the future, you want to have a deep reflection to say, hey, how might I address this when the time comes? At the end of the day, this is information about individuals, you and I, and each of these risks means a lot to these individuals. Just try to put yourself in the shoes of these individuals, and I think will make appropriate decisions for the time being. And then the next thing is further enhancement. We've, irrespective of whether you have this process going, there's always room for enhancing and strengthening, data privacy measures in the AI lifecycle. So think about enhancement. And I kind of wrapped it up with continual training. I'm continually learning, evolving in this space. I welcome you all to join in the journey, because I always say, let's learn together so that we can grow together. So happy to connect with each and every one of you on LinkedIn, understand your journey, and continue this conversation. And so at this point, I'll say thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to your questions or conversations. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Amaka, for that very insightful session. Personally, I have learned a whole lot, and I would like to just recap on a few things that stood out for me, basically. And I think the first thing you said was clearing the air, saying that AI is based on data. Recently I've seen quite a number of, a colleague of mine posted posted something. I was talking about AI and banks and all of those things, and I just couldn't help but give a very, very big laugh, saying that the only banks that will not be affected are OP. I don't know if you've seen that video. OP and Money Point. I was just laughing. But thank you so much for clearing the air that AI is based on data. Also for the AI life cycle, the planning, the design, data privacy, the deployment, and also I loved when you mentioned that multiple stakeholders should be in the room. That really stood out for me. And even when you mentioned the business guys, right, it really, it gladdened my heart to know that even the business guys should be very much involved in this whole data privacy journey. Thank you so much, Amaka. We've learned so much. Now would like to take questions from the house. If you have questions and you like to ask them in person, you could just raise your hand or drop a chat so that we could read your questions out. Okay, while they're preparing
Are
to
we continuing to record the question and answer, just so that
yes,
people
please.
will come? Okay, the
Yes,
recording
please.
is on for the question
The
and
recording
answer
is on.
session.
Yes, the recording is
Gotcha.
on.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So I believe people are preparing their questions. However, so from some of the things you said, especially about the last part of the slides that you shared, that spoke basically about the reflection, further enhancements, continuous training. I want to ask, How do you stay updated on changes in data privacy laws and regulations? And so I'm talking from the point of view of my own, from an organizational point of view, or maybe people that are new to this. How do you stay updated on changes in data privacy laws and regulations? And also, how do you now incorporate this knowledge into organizational practices? That's probably for those that are just starting out their companies and all of that.
Yeah, I think you asked a really good question. One of the things I did not do on the slide was to include resources, but really how I stay updated, especially because this is not about just the market you are, but also the markets that you serve. And I talked about where you're getting the data from, do you have the right rights to even use the data? Those are really very important. And to stay up to date for me is I got a very good partnership with privacy lawyers. Because my role is to drive the technical implementation of this regulatory work. So I have that, good collaboration with privacy lawyers, but I also I'm interested in actually reading the text itself. So sometimes I spend time reading the text. So something like GDPR, I'd read it, when, there are new regulations. If I have the time, I read those for myself because I want to have my interpretation, but I don't rely on, my understanding. I always try to engage with our legal counterparts to make sense of all of this. But once we have that clear understanding, then the next thing is um, technical implementation. And I like the fact that you raised that someone posted. For someone like me, I virtually live on LinkedIn because there's tons of resources, people sharing their insight. And I said to myself, a commitment to myself to also share my insight because that is all about building the ecosystem. So staying up to date is just really networking with the people who are in the space, challenging ourselves to learn together and grow together. And of course, there are tons of trainings that I take. There are free ones, there are paid ones. So depending on your interest area, it's up for grabs for whoever really wants to invest in this space.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer. I don't know if there are questions. Anyone? Okay, so I can see a question in the chat. Um, I can see a question in the chat. This is Obagoriola Steven. He says, thank you, Amaka, for the in-depth lecture. I want to ask if we can say that it is data privacy that is not making our government parastatals share data among themselves. I mean, you do NIN, you still go ahead to do BVN and PVC. I think what the person is trying to say, or what the person is trying to ask, that is it the data privacy laws that are not, making government parastatals share data amongst themselves, saying that when you have done NIN, why do you still have to go ahead to do BVN and also do PVC? Why don't they just share that NIN data with the guys in the bank to do BVN and also PVC?
So there are multiple ways to really look at that. One is, and you would really get an insight on really understanding what the strategy is. I really don't support silos, but there might be good use case for silos. Again, the way that I think about privacy, it should drive simplicity for the user experience. And I think what this person is referring to is, the experience is not just what it should be. And so when we look at these multiple numbers, sometimes the initiatives to even drive these numbers like BVN is different. Oh, the bank verification numbers, and then you're now doing NIN, things like that. Those are kind of multiple initiatives that got spun up at different times for different reasons. And sometimes you go to the bank, they might even ask for NIN, and you still need to have your BVN to be able to um So I don't think it's necessarily a privacy issue. I think it's an architectural issue from an government standpoint. And I mean, Nigeria, we're an evolving space. And so we just have to make do with the patchwork. But I mean, when I was in the UK, we had the NI number. The US has the social security number. So I think what this person is relying to is what would seem like that social security number for in Nigeria. Is it BVN? Is it NIN? Things like that. So I think it's a patchwork. Maybe there might be some argument to harmonize it, because if you say it's a question of privacy, you find that in some regards, people ask you to submit your BVN and people ask you to submit your NIN in the same process. So
Same. Yeah.
it's like, what are we doing? It's a broader conversation.
Can I pitch in?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
sure, please.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's primarily, like you said, it's an e-government architecture issue. So typically you're meant to have a national ID number, and everybody does all over the world, whatever name they give it, like SSN, Social Security, or NI. In other countries, it's whatever it is, you are meant to have an ID, and any service you are accessing, you are meant to just drop that ID. But the banks need, like she said, there was an initiative where the banks needed to have some harmonization. So the only way to identify you across all the banks, because I think one of the reasons was also because people were getting facilities, and bank one, bank two, bank three, you get a facility across board, and there's nothing tying your identity. So that was one of the initiatives to say, okay, so let's know where you have all the facilities. So when we put in your name, we can get all the facilities you have and whether you are owing or not. But today, you'd see that Nigeria now has a national ID thing, which is the NIN. So even though we don't have physical cards in Nigeria, which is kind of good, we have the virtual, but you always have your NI number, your NIN number, which is NIN. So, and now anything that you're doing, you have to attach your NIN. So you want to get a passport, you have to put your NIN. Your mobile number, they are tying into the NIN. So if you don't put your NIN on your mobile number, after a while that mobile number is going to get deactivated. And for the younger ones, the kids, when they want to write their high school exams, which is either WAEC or JAM, they also need to have an NIN. And then if you have children who are getting passports, 2 years old, 3 years old, they also have to have an NIN. So it's becoming the baseline across board. So at some point, the NIN would be the NIN will be the base if we get it right. But for now, because other people need to do other things, that is why we are having those various numbers. It is not data privacy at all. Okay.
Makes sense.
It's Amaka's day, so back to my shelf.
All right, thank you so very much, Amaka. I don't know if you could just quickly take one last question.
Sure.
I've actually had this thought, and then I don't know if you can just shed more light on how do you ensure transparency and accountability in our data privacy practices, especially for those of us that are data analysts, data scientists. I know you also mentioned something like that, but how do we ensure that transparency and that accountability in all of our data privacy practices?
Yeah, when we talk about transparency is what are we doing, how are we documenting what we're doing, and how are we communicating what we're doing in terms of communication strategy. And the other part of transparency is when you want to communicate, you also need to understand, who am I communicating with? Is there a shared understanding? So when we look at transparency, it's when we talk about the data, we want to understand what data you're collecting, what would you use it for? And that's why when you come in for a privacy review, we're asking you, how are we ensuring purpose limitation so that we're not taking data for one use for a secondary use case that has not been well defined, well documented. So we want to ensure that, and also if this is going to be different from stated privacy policy, I always like to say our privacy promise, because that's what we're telling those out there, that this is what we're doing with their data. If it's going to be different, we need to be updating that, we need to be informing people. So transparency leads to inform, right? You need to inform people, and to inform, sometimes some organizations don't even have visibility into the use of data, because tons of data collected from multiple sources. And as you grow as an organization, you start having legacy system, you start having blind spots. So it starts with real data governance. So as a data scientist, the work doesn't even start with you. There has to be a governing body that governs the ingestion of this data, the use of this data. And so that's where transparency starts. But it doesn't stop there. We also need to do appropriate communication outwards. And to your point on accountability is, we want to be sure that what we're doing is defensible. Who are we reporting to? Where are we, having this documentation? One of the things I see is a lot of organization, a lot of practices, people don't document. It's like we're racing to the finish line. But as you're racing to the finish line, life happens, and then you tend to forget the decisions you made, why you made those decisions. And what happens next is, if someone is coming into the team, there is sort of misplaced priority because there is nothing to rely on, and people's memories erode over time. So it's really critical in terms of accountability. Accountability goes to the governance body. The governance body should ensure clear documentation of what needs to be done. And then when we talk about transparency up to informing appropriate information to the users, I think that's how we could drive that, as a practice. It's a muscle that needs to be built. And I think it's important as an organization matures.
Thank you so much, Amaka. We have one more question in the chat
Go ahead.
from
Mhm.
Ololade
And I wanted
Awal.
to add to that is, if you're in an organization that this is not a requirement, just ask a professional. I think you should do things professionally, document, let it be you. For someone like me, I love to document. So, treat things like, when we talk about professional, it's not just there is something that exudes being a professional. It's in, how you handle your day-to-day job. So documentation also counts. So go ahead with the last question.
Great. Thank you so much, Amaka. So Ololade Lawal says, thank you so much for your time. He has two questions. The first is, he's asking, what are the future trends and developments in the field of data privacy that professionals should be aware of? And then the second question, he says, what skills are important for data privacy professional to possess? I don't know if you want me, do you want me to take the question again?
No. I heard the question, and I think those are really two profound questions. In fact, yesterday I just released on my podcast episode, pivoting to privacy engineering with precision, and I kind of addressed this in terms of future trends. Two things: privacy enhancing technology is the future for privacy. We need, in fact, adoption is so low, we need to drive the messaging. So if you're jumping into privacy, I say, one, understand privacy by design principles, understand it corely, understand privacy principles itself. Once you understand that, you understand, and I mentioned privacy threat modeling using frameworks like Linden, or using Plot for AI, that's privacy library of threats for AI. So especially because we're talking about AI, so those are really core. A professional never gets bored of the basics. So go to those principles, learn them. And once you learn them, the next thing on the horizon is privacy enhancing technology. If you understand the concept as at today, you would be ahead of the curve. Then if you invest more time in really going beyond the concept to understanding the use case and the implementation of this, I think that's it's going to set you apart and it's going to set you up right for someone who is looking to go into the privacy space. In terms of skills, I talked about, what I just mentioned also ties to skill, and then getting the right engagement to get your hands dirty, do the job, do the work. I talked about being a professional, just not about the practice around you, but for yourself, you have to hold yourself to a high standard. But privacy doesn't sit in isolation. An organization doesn't set up just because, especially except you are a privacy technology company. An organization is there because there is a business the organization wants to run. So when you're looking at skills, having learned the technical, the next thing is you need to understand the business skills. What are we trying to achieve as a business? You need to get to the heart of it. So it's not just about saying, hey, go do encryption, go do, one of this privacy enhancing technology that you've just learned. No, you need to understand what's the goal, what are we trying to achieve, and how can I think through it, using system thinking to understand, what's the best solution to unlock value within the organization. That's the second thing. And to get to this, you need close proximity with the business users. Sit in their meetings, have conversations, understand the direction of the business. Who are our competitors? Who are our customers? That should be the first thing before competitors. Who are our customers and what are their experiences? What privacy initiatives can even allow for us to have a differentiated customer experience? That's one I'll look at. And then the third thing is social skill. I think this is really critical because as a privacy engineer, we work with different people, different stakeholders, and we talk about shifting privacy left, meaning from the beginning of the conversation, during the planning stage, they should be saying, hey, Amaka, we have this thing we're trying to build. We're just thinking about it. Then you started succeeding as a privacy engineer. When they're thinking about it, they're calling you. And the only reason they will call you is because you're a pleasure to work with. You provide value. If you're just the office of no, they say, let's do this. You're like, no. People will go far in the pipeline before even pulling you in. So you need that social skill to ensure that people are thinking about you, bringing you on early, because I know from experience that the earlier I am in the pipeline, the better I can serve the people, the more I can even buy time to do more research for the project, and the higher the odds of success will be. So, in a nutshell, your technical skills, what I've explained, you really need to understand the core business skill. Wherever you are, you need to understand it, like, read quality, and then thirdly, build social skills within the organization and outside the organizations, even with privacy peers. So those would be, I think if you nail those, you should be in good standing.
Thank you so much, Amaka. Ololade, I believe your questions have been adequately answered and responded to.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amaka. This has been an amazing session. And you also mentioned something that Princess mentioned before. You said shifting data privacy left. She also mentioned shifting data left. All right, so I think this is like the second time I'm hearing this. Thank you so much, Amaka. Mr. Tosin, I don't know if you have one or two things to add before we go into the AMA session.
No, nothing to add. Amaka has done an amazing job. Amaka has done an amazing job. So, and when a professor delivers, you don't say anything else after a professor has spoken. You just say all that you have said is correct, and you move on with your life. Yeah. So I think that is where I'm going to stand and say she's done an amazing job, and there's nothing to add. Yes, I know she has to leave. So whenever if we don't have any question, Amaka, you can give us your final words, and then so that you can continue on your day. It's just about 11 o'clock, so she's right at the beginning of her day. So we need to respect that. And also thank you to Rochelle for joining from She's also in the same state with you, Amaka. So maybe you guys can
Oh,
get
we should connect, please.
Yeah. So Rochelle, also thank you. Rochelle might have some more time, but Amaka may need to leave. So whenever you feel like, Amaka, just let us know.
Sure. I would wrap up here. I think you all have been very generous to, grant me the privilege to really speak on this platform because, speaking to folks on this platform is near and dear to my heart because we are in the data economy. So just upping our games, especially with regards to privacy and understanding what might the implications be for privacy of the work that we're doing. I think it's really critical, very timely. We may not feel the heat of the regulation right now, but I always say it makes sense and it pays to be forward-looking, to think broader than, what's the pressure from, compliance or regulatory, but also to think about the end user, think about what risk might look like. And I think it's a good thing to do, especially as we build our career. And just last up, I love to connect with people in the space because we all learn together and we grow together. So feel free to, connect with me online and let's continue the conversation. Let this not be the last of it. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Bye for
Amaka.
now.
I hope to have you back whenever you feel.
Sure. Sure. Happy to come back.
Okay, so thank you, Ayo, and thank you everyone for your support. I think at this time we now move on to the second phase. Typically, we're meant to have two speakers, and that means two speakers talk on two things. But this time we had one. We might go back to two speakers depending on how things move. But today I decided that we would have a slightly different slant, which would be a kind of ask me anything, because one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people have a lot of questions they want to ask and they really don't know who to ask. So in the spirit of Easter, I decided to offer myself as the lamb that would be sacrificed to be able to take all your questions that you have, and then can take it from there. I did one last Friday. It was not announced. It was very private. I just did it for a few people. And then I'll be doing another one, which is not Analytics Africa. This is just Tosin helping people. So I'll be doing another one on the 13th of April. So you can go to my website, tosins.com. So it's not Analytics Africa, but today we would be doing an Analytics Africa Ask Me Anything session, whereby any questions you have on data analytics, any question you have on career, you can ask. So we have about 40 minutes more, and let's go. So any question, literally. Let me see if I can see questions in the chat window. No. Okay, so yes, so if you have any questions bugging you, okay, this data literacy thing or this data privacy thing or data analytics thing, what's it about? How do I grow? What do I do? What's my next step? Yes, so this is the time where you can ask those questions. If you're not clear, feel free to ask. You can open your mic. It's free and there's nothing behind it. Just ask any questions that you think you have. Is there anything bothering you that you're not sure of? Or if there's some clarity that you've been worried about and you've not gotten anybody to give you that response, you can be able to ask. Between myself, Yinka, Ayo, and any other person on the call, I guess might be able to give you some guidance. And if we need to have further conversations, you can always book a session. I can always drop my calendar link for you, and we can always book a session. Okay, so waiting. waiting, waiting, and waiting. Thank you for joining, Lolade. Thank you for joining, Lolade. It's been a while. We need to catch up one of these days.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, please go ahead. Who's speaking? Okay. In the absence of any questions, it seems everybody has all the knowledge they need. So let's not waste your time asking questions unless you are still thinking about it. If you are thinking about it or if you are trying to type something, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we can call it an evening and we give you back 39 minutes of your time. Yes, you can DM me on LinkedIn, Lolade. It's not you that should be asking that question now. You can definitely, Lolade. Yes, you can. I believe this is the Lolade Lawal that I know. So yes, you can DM me on LinkedIn.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, okay. This Lolade is a guy.
Yes, it is.
Oh, I see. Okay, it's not the Lolade Lawal that I know. I have a Lolade Lawal friend, and she's a lady.
I'm a guy, sir.
She's also into data. Okay, interesting. Small world. Okay, cool. All right.
Thank you, sir.
In the absence of any questions, Ayo, Yinka, any comments?
No comment from here. Thank you so much, Mr. Tosin. And
No
thank you, everyone.
comments from my end.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Tokwe. Thank you, Lolade. And enjoy the rest of your evening. So we've been generous enough to give you back 17 minutes of your evening. I think that's a lot. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for coming and all the best.